Of course.
Of course. Okay. I love that. Okay. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for coming today. My name is Heather Latino, and I'm an outreach program manager at the United States Embassy. And it is my pleasure to introduce to you our guest speaker today, Cory Spiller, who is an assistant at the embassy. Sorry, I'll pause and you can all clap really loud for him. Welcome, Cory.
Thank you.
He is a political assistant at the embassy, and he's going to talk today about climate change.
That's right.
So, welcome, Cory.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. It's really fun to be here and get a break from what I usually do, sitting at the embassy, typing on my computer all day. So yeah, I was just going to introduce myself real quick. As Heather said, I work in the political economics section at the embassy. So what I usually do is I meet people in your government, or I meet people that work at non-governmental organizations or members of the public, and I learn about your country, and I write about it, and I send my reports back to the State Department in Washington, D.C., and they use that information to make policies that can go into new programs in the area, in your country or in the region, or informs our ambassador, or right now we have a charge at the embassy about what to talk with your government about. So that's what I'm doing right now. So yeah, today I'm very happy to talk about Earth Day. It's a subject that I'm really passionate about. I really care about the environment, and I really care about nature. And I hope that this presentation is a little interesting for you. And I really would appreciate you if you would like to get involved a little bit in the discussion. You'll see on some of the slides that I have some questions at the bottom. And if you have ideas about how to answer these questions, I look forward to hearing about it. But and I put a lot of videos in here because I didn't want to have to just talk the whole time. So let's start the first video and learn about Earth Day. Oh, I swear this is a video. I don't know if you were able to keep up with that, but I thought one of the really interesting points there at the end was that this is Earth Day is one of the biggest celebrations in the world now. They called it a secular celebration, not a religious one. But among the non-religious celebrations, this is one of the biggest. And it's celebrated in every country in the world. And I think it's a really special. And what else I thought was interesting in that video was a little bit of the history of Earth Day, because it started in the United States. And one of the reasons they started it was because about 50 years ago, there was a lot of pollution in the United States. And don't get me wrong, there still is a lot of pollution and environmental problems in the United States even today. But back in the 1970s, there weren't many laws to protect the environment. And companies like chemical companies and oil refineries and different industries were able to just dump all of their waste into the rivers. And there's a story I think it mentioned an oil spill, but I also read that another thing that happened was there's a river in Ohio where they kept dumping toxic waste into the river, and it lit on fire, which is just amazing that water could be on fire because it had so much chemical waste in it. And so people in the 1960s, they started to realize that in the United States that it just was out of control. So there was a political movement, people demonstrated in the streets, and they demanded that the US government start doing something to protect the environment. So a few of the great things they did, the US government and the parliament and the president at the time, they passed the Clean Water Act. They passed the Clean Air Act. And they passed the Endangered Species Act. Clean Water and Clean Air Act, that makes sense. You can't just let companies and different people put anything into the air they want or spill any toxic waste in our rivers. So they made laws that said, we're going to monitor what you're putting in, and we're going to make sure that you're not polluting too much. The Endangered Species Act, what they found was that some species were becoming extinct. So they made a law that said, you're not allowed to do things that make species go entirely extinct. So now there's a lot of laws about that. I think I have a long presentation. Keep going. So here talks more about the start of Earth Day, how it was a national movement. And one of the other things that it mentions here in the smaller print is that it also made the government create the Environmental Protection Agency. It's a specific ministry, like you have ministries, we have what we call agencies, and that one is just focused on making sure that we keep air, water, everything else unpolluted. So right now, this is a statement that I found recently. The United States commits itself to take actions that will ensure a clean and healthy earth for our children and grandchildren. I think that's a really important thing to think about, is that if we don't treat the environment right now, that we're ruining things for generations. It's not just about us right now. Here's another statement. We are confronting parallel climate and biodiversity crises that require vigilance and action. We cannot afford to sit idly by as global warming and habitat loss threaten the extinction of between 1/3 and 1/2 of all species on the earth by the end of the century. So that's a really powerful warning that we need to start making better decisions now if we want to stop what's happening all across the world. So here's a question. What are the most pressing environmental problems you see across the world or in the Kyrgyz Republic? Can anybody think of an environmental problem that they know about?
Global warming.
Global warming, and you said? Trash. Yeah. Like air pollution?
Yes.
Yeah. So those are three great ones. And I honestly, I have to say that that I'm a little.
In the Kyrgyz Republic, air pollution.
Yeah.
Most.
I'm definitely going to talk about that and global warming today. But one thing I haven't mentioned is plastic. What is it? Plastic bottles, single-use plastic, because I use this one time and then I throw it away. So I'm a little ashamed of myself for using this. I didn't bring my own water bottle today, and I did want to drink water though. So if we think ahead, we can make better decisions. But you're right, the plastic is a huge problem, and it's really a problem in the oceans where it's collecting. I'm not going to talk about climate change and global warming right now because that's a big part of the rest of the presentation. So I'll keep going. Okay, so up here it says, you may be wondering why I'm talking about this when I said I work in the political economic section of the embassy. Well, I used to be an environmental lawyer, and then I followed my wife on her assignment
The ocean is a busy.
Hold on. Follow my wife on her assignment abroad. So now I used to be an environmental lawyer, and what I did was I advised an agency in the U.S. federal government that installs wind turbines out in the water for energy development. And my job was to be part of the team that made sure that when they installed those big turbines, that they didn't hurt the environment where they were installing them. So this is a video about the organization I work for. See, it's called BOEM, Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. And I think it's interesting because it'll give you an idea of how we protect the environment.
Place, full of many human activities such as fishing, shipping, and energy development. These activities generate traffic, emissions, noise, and light which could be harmful to animals and the ocean environment. That's why the government must consider the possible impacts on the marine and coastal environment before allowing any new activities. So the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, or BOEM, manages the nation's mineral and energy resources on the U.S. Outer Continental Shelf, or OCS, and works to ensure that negative impacts are avoided or reduced when possible. There are multiple factors in BOEM studies to consider how to manage human activities. For example, underwater noise is a concern because many marine animals rely on their hearing for survival. So BOEM is studying how noise may disturb or harm these animals and is taking action to reduce potential impacts like setting up no activity zones or restricting activities to certain times of the year. New developments can also cause increased boat traffic, which could lead to more collisions between vessels and marine animals, like large whales. BOEM considers ways to keep marine life safe by recommending that vessels slow down or avoid areas where whales are known to congregate. Farther offshore and deeper in the ocean, the sea floor is home to communities of benthic marine organisms as well as archaeological resources like shipwrecks where drilling and dredging can disturb or damage them. BOEM is working to map the location of shipwrecks and sensitive habitats so that activities are avoided in these areas. Offshore energy development can also increase conflicts with other activities. So it is critical to balance the need for energy development and other uses through coordination of area closures at specific times. BOEM must also consider the impacts on coastal and human environments. Artificial lighting for both onshore and offshore infrastructure and vessels can disorient thousands of young seabirds and sea turtle hatchlings heading out to sea. Building or expanding onshore infrastructure can increase traffic and land disturbance, which may impact the people and species who depend on those habitats. This visible infrastructure can also alter the existing seascape by disrupting ocean views, impacting cultural sites, and potentially affecting tourism and...
Okay. So that's just that's a lot of the kind of work I did, and it's in environmental analysis. You know, looking at how the installation of, you saw those big windmills out in the ocean, about what they do to the environment. And one of the laws that I had to analyze is called the National Environmental Policy Act. And a lot of countries have laws like this. And what it basically does is, if the government is going to allow like a company to go out and do something on your land, on your country's land, that they have to think about what the environmental impacts are. Are they going to kill an endangered species? Are they going to pollute the river? Are they going to put too much air pollution into the sky? And before the government is able to approve that activity, they have to go through this analysis. And so here's some of the things you have to do. They have to do an environmental impact statement, and they have to listen to the public. Because the water is going to be polluted, well, then maybe they shouldn't approve it. They have to show that they considered alternatives. Well, maybe we should do it somewhere else. Why are you doing it right here where it's, you know, it could be a bad place to do it? Or they must include mitigation and monitoring plans. So like mitigation is like, Well, if you're going to pollute, maybe you can set up a system where less pollution comes out, or we can capture it. And then my point here is that in the United States, a lot of people will sue the government to stop a project, and they'll say, hey, you didn't do this analysis correctly. You forgot to look at an alternative. And so that's what a lot of what I did, was defend the agency's decision. But sometimes the agency would lose in court, and they'd have to redo the analysis or find a different place to do the project or change the project. So this system seems to be working in the United States. And I know that the Kyrgyz Republic and other countries are developing their own environmental analysis process. It's very important. Are there projects affecting the Kyrgyz Republic environment? Can you think of like, businesses or activities that are hurting your country's environment? See a hand back there?
So she says be green, so maybe an example of a project or business that's helping.
Yeah. Okay, so like recycling is kind of like a mitigation, like how to deal with the fact that we're making waste all the time. Wouldn't it be great if we want to use these, if we can mitigate the problem by turning this back into something we can use again? But I know that like the Kyrgyz Republic has mining. That's a big source of your economy. And I know mining has big effects on the environment. It can cause water pollution. I think it can cause air pollution. I'm not an expert on it. And I think it can, damage the mountain landscape. So that's something to consider. Okay. So now I want to kind of shift and talk about climate, because right now that's a really important subject all across the world. Everyone's really concerned about the climate crisis, about global warming, and about what that means for the future of our species and our world. So this is a video that gives an introduction to that topic.
We hear it so much that it feels like a buzzword, but it is far from. Climate change is a real and serious issue. But isn't the climate always changing? What exactly is climate change? Should we care? Well, the Earth's climate has changed throughout history. Most of these slight changes are caused by small variations in the Earth's orbit. But climate change as we know it today is characterized by an abrupt increase in the Earth's temperature. It is estimated to have gotten 1.2 to 1.4 degrees Fahrenheit warmer in just the last century. 10 out of the last 13 years were the warmest on record. 97% of climate scientists agree that this new tendency is not caused by the variations in the Earth's orbit, but rather very likely caused by human activities. That means you, me. And since the Industrial Revolution, we've come a long way. Humans built airplanes, faster cars, developed remarkable technology, and learned how the natural resources around us can be used for our benefit. Although this has led to many wonderful inventions and advancements, like the device you're using to watch this video, or the ability to take a plane halfway around the world, it also means we've increased our consumption of natural resources and in turn released a lot of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. Now, greenhouse gases occur naturally, but in excess can be dangerous to our planet. Modern human activities have increased the release of non-naturally occurring greenhouse gases because we have stepped up our demand for burning fossil fuels. The composition of greenhouse gases traps heat radiated from the sun. The more heat they trap, the warmer our planet gets. And as our planet gets warmer, we begin to feel the effects. One of climate change's biggest victims is our oceans. Oceans regulate the Earth's temperature and provide 50% of the Earth's oxygen. But climate change has increased the global temperature of the oceans by more than 0.3 degrees Fahrenheit since 1969. Although a warmer ocean might seem inviting to a beachgoer, it actually has devastating consequences for supporting life at sea. One of those consequences is ocean acidification, a direct effect of increased dissolved CO2. Since the late 18th century, ocean surface acidification has increased by 30%. A higher acid content means calcifying species, like oysters and clams, shell water corals, are at risk. putting the entire ocean food web at risk. This is bad news because 1 billion people rely on the ocean as its primary source of protein. Climate change has also caused the sea level to rise. Just in the last century, sea levels have risen 6.7 inches, but the rate in the last decade has nearly doubled. Sea levels have risen because as the ocean gets warmer, it swells. On top of that, glaciers and ice sheets are melting. Antarctica lost 36 cubic miles of ice between 2002 and 2005, and since 1994, each year on average, the Earth has lost 400 billion tons from its glaciers. That's like an ice cube 7.5 kilometers on the side, 4 miles on the side, melting and flowing into the sea. When all that ice melts, it fills up our oceans, and just like filling up a bathtub, the shores can't hold all that water, and coastal regions get flooded. Troubling signs of climate change are increased extreme weather events. Natural disasters like floods, tornadoes, and deadly heat waves are more obvious to humans because of their immediate impact and their sharing of the images in the media. Climate change, as we know it today, is change in our Earth's overall temperature with massive and permanent ramifications. Although its consequences can be threatening, scientists still believe there are things we can do on a personal level to help. Recycle and reuse things. Walk or use public transportation to get to work. Turn off your electronics when you're not using them. Eat less meat. While you're at it, eat more locally grown vegetables and fruits. And last but not least, spread your knowledge and concerns about climate change with others. When it comes to climate change, the main takeaway is that it's real. And although we are part of the cause, we can also be part of the solution.
I thought that's great that he mentioned at the end that something that we can all do is to share our knowledge about this. So I hope that this is helpful in some way, and that after this that you'll talk about this with your friends and family, because it's a really important issue. So this is a graph that tells a little bit more about what greenhouse gases are, because when they talk about climate change, everyone's always talking about greenhouse gases. And when I was putting this together, I was like, well, what exactly is that? So this actually shows the greenhouse gases the United States emits. And you can see most of them are carbon dioxide. Some is methane. And then there's nitrous oxide and fluorinated gases. And carbon dioxide comes from burning fossil fuels. And I know that at least one source of methane, a lot of it comes from the agricultural industry. Did you guys know that when cows or other large animals burp, they release methane? So it's a big source of one of the greenhouse gases that causes global warming. So this is a really interesting diagram because it has a lot of information about where our greenhouse gases are coming from. As you can see, almost all of them come from energy use or production. It looks like energy use from industrial companies, companies making things or transporting things is a major part of it. Transportation, getting around town in your car, or airplanes. Well, look, airplanes is only 1.9%, whereas road transportation's 12%. It's a lot more. Energy use in buildings is very high. 10% come from our homes. Then you have agriculture there, which I think is a surprise to me. I found out that how much of our greenhouse gases come from agricultural activities. And so when we think about how we're going to mitigate, how we're going to change our industries and the way we live, this is where we need to start. We need to start with the biggest ones. So, who's really responsible? Who's doing this? I mean, we all have a responsibility as citizens of the world to make sure that we're not polluting. But this graph shows which countries are emitting the most CO2, which is like burning fossil fuels. And you'll see that China is the biggest, which kind of makes sense because it's the largest country in the world. It has a population that's 3 times as big as the United States. And the United States is second with 14%. So we should expect that countries that are emitting the most greenhouse gases and causing the global warming more than anyone else should take some responsibility and deal with this problem. So the United States is trying to address climate change and greenhouse gases. And it's a big part of our foreign policy. And when I'm working in the embassy, I'm trying to help implement the U.S. foreign policy. President Biden, who's been our president now for, almost 2 years, recently said he wants our domestic climate targets to be aligned with global, with keeping the temperature rise to 1.5 degrees or less. So that's what everybody's scared about, is that if the temperature keeps rising, it'll get out of control. And there's some information that's really worrisome that once you get up to like 2% Celsius hotter, things start escalating by themselves. And we could really lose the opportunity to stop global warming. So the United States has a plan to address it in our country and to also help other countries address climate change. So here we have the United States is on a path to a net zero emissions economy by 2050. That means that we're still going to release greenhouse gases. We can't stop entirely, but there will be some activities that capture the carbon or the greenhouse gases that we release, like planting a forest. Actually, by planting trees or other plants, you capture carbon, and that can counterbalance the greenhouse gases that you're putting out. And then the federal government itself, that's not the whole country, but the government plans to be only using renewable energy. So they won't be powering their cars or their buildings with anything but renewable energy, like wind turbines, solar power, by 2035. Does anybody have an idea about how we can stop global warming? Recycling, yeah, that's a good one. What's it? I'm sorry. Like local agriculture? Or that's okay. Anybody?
Plant trees.
Plant trees is great. Yeah, and we need to stop cutting trees too. And unfortunately, there's a lot of cutting of trees in the Amazon rainforest, which produces a lot of the oxygen we breathe. It comes all the way from Brazil and other countries in South America where there's this gigantic rainforest, but they want trees so that they can plant, agriculture to make money. But when they do it, they're ruining the rainforest, and it's going to have a huge effect on global warming and the air we breathe. So this is a little information. I realize that you can't see it at all, which is a shame. But this is talking about greenhouse gas removal. And this is an idea, there's a new technology, it's a new effort to not just stop releasing it, but to try to capture it, and different ways you can do it. And this one says afforestation, which means more forests, some common sense, habitat restoration, letting the wild nature just continue as it normally does instead of turning it into farms or cities. But a lot of these other ones are a little experimental. We don't know if they work yet. So what's really important is to try to reduce the greenhouse gases. This is a little politics. a big problem when you talk about climate change. And
I spoke earlier today with John Kerry, a special envoy for climate and a sponsor for the Center for Global Development. Here are some edited excerpts from our wide-ranging conversation. I asked whether he still believes Congress will approve more money to help poor adapt to climate change, given the political
the climate legislation. And I know folks are talking now in these days, and I remain very hopeful we can get kind of a climate piece of legislation. It is really hard for me to fathom that the United States Senate, that I served in for 28 years, when we used to be able to deal with each other on a bipartisan basis and get things done, that now there are a group of people who don't even accept science that's now settled on this, and that we're not able to move forward. Every single economic analysis that is a serious economic analysis that has been peer reviewed and put out over the last 15, 20 years documents that it is far, far more expensive to not respond to climate than it is to respond. If we were
so that's a really interesting point. So John Kerry, he ran for president. He was a U.S. senator for a long time, and now he's the U.S. State Department's special representative or envoy on climate change. So he attends a lot of international meetings about climate change. And what he talked about there at the end is really interesting. It's more expensive to not deal with climate change. Because he's saying if we just let it go and we let it happen, all these bad things are going to happen to all these different countries in the world, and they're going to have to spend a lot of money and use a lot of the resources of the country to fix the problems. And if we try to prevent the problem rather than fix it later, it'll be cheaper for us all. It's another way to look at it, an economic way to look at it. And also, he was talking about, what he's talking about that in that video is that there are, you have a parliament, right? One of the ways your country makes decisions. And in the United States, we call our Congress, and we have a Senate, in the Senate where he was, they can't come to an agreement about how to address climate change in America or how to help developing countries like Kyrgyzstan address climate change here. And why is that? Why do we have political divisions based on climate change? Well, some people are climate deniers. They say that the climate crisis is either not happening, but that's less and less. More and more often, you don't really see people say that it's not warmer. But then they'll argue that it's not that big of a deal, that it's going to be fine. But the fact of the matter is, like 97% of the scientists that work on this issue say that we have to do something about it now. We have very little time. So I wanted to let you guys know that there are people that will tell you that climate change isn't real. And it's a problem all over the world, including in the United States. Why do you think some people would argue that we should take an action to stop climate change? Why do you think they would do that? You say it's expensive? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that the expense part's a big thing. So you have politicians and leaders who are worried about the economy. They're worried they need businesses to do well. And they're scared that if you make laws that say, oh, you can't pollute, then those companies won't do as well. And then the economy of the country will suffer. So they're really focused on that. And they want the economy to do well so bad that they'll refuse to see what scientists are telling us about the crisis. But again, John Kerry said, it'll be more expensive if you don't deal with it now. So it's not a good argument. So now I want to talk about air pollution, because as somebody mentioned, that's like a really obvious effect of that happens in Bishkek. So let's learn a little bit about air pollution.
Air pollution consists of chemicals or particles in the atmosphere that pose serious health and environmental threats. But what causes air pollution, and what does it mean for our planet? Some air pollution comes from natural sources like volcanic eruptions, wildfires, or allergens. But most air pollution results from human activities, such as energy use and agriculture. Types of human-made air pollution. When we use fossil fuels to produce energy, they release greenhouse gases into the air. These emissions, such as carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and fluorinated gases, trap heat from the sun in Earth's atmosphere, leading to a rise in global temperatures. This creates a cycle where air pollution contributes to climate change, and climate change creates higher temperatures. In turn, higher temperatures intensify some types of air pollution. For example, climate change increases smog because it forms in the presence of high heat and increased levels of ultraviolet radiation. More frequent extreme weather, such as flooding, contributes to damp conditions and therefore to a rise in mold. Warmer weather also leads to longer pollen seasons and therefore more pollen production. Smog is a type of air pollution that reduces visibility and has serious health effects. Smog can be divided into two categories: sulfurous and photochemical. Sulfurous smog is made up of chemical compounds called sulfur oxides. It occurs when burning sulfur, which is coal. Photochemical smog, also called ground-level ozone, is a result of the reaction between sunlight, nitrogen oxides, and volatile organic compounds. Nitrogen oxides come from car exhaust, coal power plants, and factory emissions. Volatile organic compounds are released from gasoline, paints, and many cleaning solvents. Smog not only creates a brown haze that reduces visibility, but also harms plants, irritates the eyes, and causes respiratory distress. Another category of air pollution is toxic pollutants. These are chemicals such as mercury, lead, dioxins, and benzene that are released during gas or coal combustion, waste incineration, or burning of gasoline. In addition to adverse environmental effects, toxic air pollution can cause serious health problems such as cancer, complications, and birth defects. While air pollution has many consequences for our planet, there are solutions. We can limit toxic pollutants, smog, and greenhouse gases by decreasing the use of fossil fuels, such as in transportation, manufacturing, and electricity generation. Reducing air pollution not only contributes to a cleaner environment and better human health, but can also slow the rate of global warming.
So I've only lived here a year and a half, but I've seen 2 winters, and I remember the winter before last had a lot of smog, and I think it's a very big problem in Bishkek. I watch the air quality reports that you can find on the internet, and often during the winter, Bishkek has some of the worst air quality in the world. It can be kind of scary, I think. I looked up the air quality on the 20th, just a couple of days ago when I was preparing this. And even in the summer or in the spring now, when usually the air seems pretty good, Bishkek still had the 5th worst air pollution in the world. I found out that the air pollution in Bishkek is caused by a combination of things: coal in homes, a coal-fired power, and where you put your trash when it goes to the dump, and also from emissions from cars. What do you think is the biggest cause of smog in Bishkek? And I don't know the answer, but I'd just be interested to hear what you have to say. Like when you think of when it's smoggy out, what do you think is causing it? The back that he hasn't had a chance to talk?
Power station.
The power station? Cars?
Yes, old cars.
Old cars? Anybody else? Factories?
And heating coal.
Coal burning. Yeah. Yeah, you're right. And I think it's a really interesting point about the old cars, because there are things that you can do to, if you have new cars with emit less. And obviously, if you can get an electric car, and they're very expensive, so not everybody can have one, they don't emission. But you're all right. I thought I was a bit surprised out because I see the cars and I definitely see the power station, because sometimes I can smell it and then I'll see that it, like the smoke is pointed at us. I didn't know about the city dump. So this is actually a picture of the Bishkek city dump, and it's burning. And this happens in countries all over the world. It's not just Bishkek. But unfortunately, the dumps catch on fire. And then as we learned in the video, they emit toxic air pollution. So it's a big problem. And these aren't easy problems to fix. But it's good to know about them and come up with a plan on how to deal with it. Okay, I think I accidentally put the same slide here. Maybe not. Yeah, it says, I think this is dependence on coal means that the Kyrgyz capital, Bishkek, experiences severe and hazardous air pollution, sometimes worse than cities like New Delhi, which is often considered the worst air pollution in the world. Your government, the Kyrgyz government, aims to reduce coal use and increase the take-up of alternatives, including hydropower, because if you can produce electricity from a water that spins a turbine, it doesn't produce emissions, and that would be cleaner. And I read, this is from the United Nations, that there are 4,000 deaths per year. Premature means early. People die early from the air pollution, which is scary. And that was just in 2016. So I think we kind of talked about this already. How can we improve the air quality? Cars, stop the trash, find renewable uses of energy. And that's not easy. It costs a lot of money to build new sources of energy to power your entire city. We could do wind turbines, or you can do solar power, or you can do hydropower, but all of those are major infrastructure projects that require huge amounts of investment. So now I want to talk a little bit about the Paris Climate Accord. Do I have till 4 or, yeah?
Yeah,
Is that till 4? Okay.
another 10.
Okay. And maybe you've heard about the Paris Climate Agreement or the Paris Climate Accord. It's a treaty. So it's when countries get together and they make an agreement. Let's all do the same thing. And the Paris Climate Accord is the world's attempt to stop climate change. And so, oh, I think I have the wrong video there. Okay, I think I just had the wrong header. Sorry. I will talk about the Paris Climate Accord right after this video.
Melting glaciers aren't just a future problem. They're already causing problems all over the world right now. There are about 200,000 glaciers throughout the world, and communities are dependent on them for survival. Glaciers in the Rwenzori Mountains in Africa protected the region from malaria for generations. The glaciers once created microclimates where malaria-carrying mosquitoes couldn't survive. The locals have a saying, God is in the ice. Glaciers were once so big they fed the Nile, but now they're melting, and the region is being plagued by malaria. Over the last century, those glaciers have shrunk by almost 85%, and by 2030, they could be completely gone. In Switzerland, glacial runoff powers the country's hydroelectric plants. These plants provide more than half of the country's electricity. As the glaciers melt, it's creating a surplus of hydropower. That might be a good thing for now, but by 2030, most glaciers
I don't really
most glaciers aren't the future.
have time for all of the videos anyway. But the reason I put this video in is because I wanted to point out another thing that's about climate change that's really affecting the Kyrgyz Republic. Now, rising ocean levels, while they indirectly will affect you and your country, there's not a direct effect because you don't have a shoreline with the ocean. But you have amazing amount of glaciers up in the mountains, and they are melting at a very quick rate. And what does that mean? Well, your country relies on that water that comes from the glaciers for hydropower, and hopefully more hydropower, which is a better source of electricity, it's cleaner, and also for agriculture and for drinking water. And as it pointed out in Switzerland, which is a country a lot like the Kyrgyz Republic with a lot of mountains, it's okay right now because the glaciers are melting and there's lots of water. The Toktagul Reservoir is full. But what happens by 2030, by 2060, by 2090? Are they all gone? And then if they are gone, the country is going to have to deal with the fact that there's less water. There's not a sustainable amount of water. So that's an issue that's affecting everybody, all countries with mountain landscapes. Could anyone think of any other effects that global warming is having on the Kyrgyz? I mean, we've talked about air pollution, but is there anything else you can think of? You got glacier, air pollution that are really affecting your country.
Ozone holes. Ozone holes.
Ozone.
Yes.
If we release all these greenhouse gases, it damages the ozone layer, which protects us from ultraviolet light. There'll be more skin cancer. One other thing, and I don't know about this, but maybe this will affect it. In the United States, in the western part of our country, there's a lot more forest fires because it's drier. That may happen in Kyrgyzstan, the Kyrgyz Republic too. Something to keep an eye on. So now we're here talking about the Paris Climate Agreement. Again, this is the world's attempt to address climate change.
The Paris Agreement? The Paris Agreement is a legally binding international treaty on climate change to limit global warming to preferably to 1.5 degrees Celsius compared to pre-industrial levels. This requires economic and social transformation to face the climate challenges now and moving into the future based on the best available science. The Paris Agreement works on a 5-year cycle of increasingly ambitious climate action. By 2020, countries communicate their plans known as nationally determined contributions. Countries communicate actions they will take to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions in order to reach the goals of the Paris Agreement. Countries also communicate actions they will take to build resilience to adapt to the impacts of rising temperatures. This may include information on adaptation and finance flows. The Paris Agreement also provides a framework for financial, technical, and capacity building support to those countries who need it. Starting in 2024, countries report transparently on actions taken. Collective progress under the Paris Agreement will be assessed through a global stocktake. This will lead to recommendations for countries to set more ambitious plans in the next round.
So you saw there was started in 2020, and then in 2025 there's a new step, and there's a lot of jargon, which means like words that only the experts kind of know, but it all makes sense if you actually read about it. And like one of the terms they say is nationally determined contribution. That means what is each country going to do to stop emitting, to emit less greenhouse gases? This is the Kyrgyz Republic national determined contribution. So your country is a member of the Paris Climate Agreement, yeah, from 2020. And they just this year released their nationally determined contribution. And for the most part, is to don't use fossil fuels that produce less air pollution, or to use more hydropower. So that's the plan. But we need to remember that if the glaciers melt, those hydropower plants may not have as much source of water. So it's good to have a diversification of different types of renewable, sustainable energy sources to make sure that we reduce the greenhouse gases. Let's keep going. Right, so your country has said that it will reduce greenhouse gases by 15.97% by 2030 under the business as usual. That means if they just keep doing what they're doing, they are going to reduce greenhouse gases. But with international support, that means money from countries like the United States. They could make new power plants that reduce greenhouse gases by 43%. That's a huge difference. That would be great. But how much is it going to cost? $10 billion of investments, of which 6.3 must come from international financial assistance. So basically what the Kyrgyz Republic is saying is, we can do this. We can cut greenhouse gases by 43% if we can find $6.3 billion from other countries. And well, like we heard from John Kerry, that's not easy all the time. And America, the United States is looking for ways to fund it, and Europe as well. But these are the kinds of challenges that we all face. I'm going to skip this question because I want to make sure I get through my whole presentation. And this is the last one. Anybody know who this is?
Sure.
Oh, there you go. Greta Thunberg. Let's hear what she has to say.
There is no planet B. There is no planet blah. Blah, blah, blah. Blah, blah, blah. This is not about some expensive, politically correct green act and bunny hugging or blah, blah, blah. Build back better, blah, blah, blah. Green economy, blah, blah, blah. Net zero by 2050, blah, blah, blah. Net zero by 2050, blah, blah, blah. Net zero, blah, blah, blah. Climate neutral, blah, blah, blah. This is all we hear from our so-called leaders. Words that sound great, but so far has led to no action. Our hopes and dreams drown in their empty words and promises. Of course, we need construction, but they've now had 30 years of blah, 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 and where has that led us? Over 50% of all our CO2 emissions have occurred since 1990, and a third since 2005. All this while the media is reporting on what the leaders.
Okay, so does anybody? What do you think she was getting at with when she's talking about blah? I'll give you a second. Less words? Yeah, I think that's part of it.